that are currently in the courts of law. In fact, the lawyers on records on both sides are Nelson Harvey and Senior Counsel Ahmed Nasser.
Yes, Honorable Jude Jomo.
Madam Speaker, sorry, Mr. Speaker. I was just.
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I was just promoting the honorable member. It was Speaker. And, but now that she's not very happy about it, I think I demote her. Mr. Speaker, I am not aware of this matter being in court. The matter that was in court is concluded, and I have quoted that matter here. If there are other matters concerning Tatu City, I am not interested. I am interested in Tatu Estate. Tatu Estate and Tatu City are two different things. The landowners, they do not own the city. They own Tatu Estate, not Tatu City. Tatu City, that's a different business. That's somebody maybe who has come, bought land as is building a city. But there is Tatu Estate that is owned by local owners in Kiambu. People who have bought shares in a company and bought the land, and maybe they have sold to others who are in Tatu City. But I am not interested in what Tatu City is doing. I am interested in Tatu Estate and Kofinaf Estate. Those are the farms that I am talking about. I'm not talking about Tatu City.
Very well. Do I see some, the member for Makueni intends to comment, is it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. The matter of Tatu Estates has been on for quite a while, Mr. Speaker, and the proof of ownership of land is the person actually registered under that land, and if it is a land company, the people involved. And the Constitution is clear on this. If foreigners are interested in land in Kenya, what exactly should happen? And if it is a freehold or a leasehold, what should be the situation in Kenya? So way forward, when it comes to a matter pending in court, I think anybody alleging it should be able to table documents for the court, for Parliament to see that particular matter and whether it touches in any way what the petition is presenting. So I believe the matter can proceed to be allocated to a relevant committee, probably the Committee of Lands, and should matters be then presented, Mr. Speaker, then at that particular moment, the committee can report it back to you, and then we will now provide evidence that the matter is pending before court. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I think without even allowing a lot of comments on this, which one more again? Member, Chair Budget. This is about, Honorable Jude Jomo says it's about Tatu Estate.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. You know, Tatu Estate is in Kiambu, and many of the private investors are residents of our county. And Honorable Speaker, it's not just Kiambu constituency. It's all the way from Thika, stretching all the way to Kikuyu, Kabete, Limuru, and Lari. And therefore,
St. Canisius, Chesumei constituency, Nandi County. Kabirel High School, Nandi Hills, Nandi County. St. Barnabas High School, Boni East, Makueni County. Stella Maris, Imenti South, Meru County.
Nandi Hills constituency. And therefore, also take this opportunity to welcome all. I think the question that the Honorable Jude Jomo should also be asking the committee to check is what value addition are these private investors putting on this land, even as they on-sell it to other people? Because it's not just a question of coming here, registering companies, registering them in some tax havens outside of the country, in Mauritius and elsewhere. Then you sell the land and take off with expatriate profits from our own land, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, may I dare say, land that was set aside to settle quotas.
You see, that lengthy submission would be very useful before the committee.
Of course, Honorable Speaker, I am well informed, and I have indeed tabled before the Lands Committee issues to do with other parcels of land in Kiambu, especially in Kikuyu, in Bogoto, land that was set aside 100 acres to
Clear that he's not the son of a home guy. He's the son of a peasant, Mr. Speaker. So he was talking, it's not like somebody who owns land somewhere in Togoto. He's a peasant farmer. Mr. Speaker, was a lengthy, contribution to do, like Honorable Ichungwa, should appear before the committee. And Mr. Speaker, we need to discuss land as an issue in this House. I may take the responsibility to bring a motion of adjournment to discuss, Mr. Speaker, how we are going to face the land issue, Mr. Speaker. You can see the chairman
of Tato Estate and Coffee. Mr. Speaker, sir, recently the whole country, the whole world has seen demonstrations by people of Githunguri.
Brought that because there is a time I was a manager in those coffee farms while he was an electrician who could go around the whole coffee farms are putting electricity.
Where the land officer, they inherit each other, the corruption network, and it goes on throughout. And I wish to say that this is time when we should be having titles, the ones the government has
For Kilifi North.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you. I would like to contribute to this issue of land. Apart from these estates coming up every place, the National Lands Commission and
a resolution aim to get the House to resolve in a particular direction. So that, because if you just come motion of adjournment, there's even no question put. The time just ends and the people walk out. So I think whereas it's perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The national, statement on the mismanagement of the wildlife sector in Kenya. Honorable Speaker, pursuant to the Standing Order 43, I wish to make a statement regarding the challenges currently facing Kenya Wildlife Service. Honorable Speaker, the socio-economic importance of the wildlife sector remains central to the economic sustainability of our country. For instance, besides being a major foreign exchange earner, through various wildlife sector contributes to the positive. Honorable Speaker, it is worrying that despite the many benefits we get through wildlife sector, is currently facing many challenges due to mismanagement of the service by the policymakers and implementers, corruption and interference arising from some NGOs, sector brokers, a large low moral amongst its workers, leading to high rate of exodus, staff to seek for greener pastures. Couple conflicts with rural committees having failed to protect people and their property against wildlife attack. Mr. Speaker, these challenges have been associated with inadequate facilitation of the KWS personnel level at county and county wildlife conservation and compensation committees. Since decision-making of key matters such as financial and procurement are centralized at the national level without the input of crucial service providers at the counties and sub-county, hampering efficient service delivery. Honorable Speaker, even after Wildlife Conservation and Management Act 2013 came into force, the wildlife sector management functions are still over-centralized at the national level, with its authority and operational resources still retained at Langata headquarters. The greatly hampering service delivery in the counties. Honorable Speaker, arising from this, an urgent need for the National Assembly to expeditiously intervene in addressing the challenges faced by KWS with a view to...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 44, Section 2C, I wish to request for a statement from the chairperson of the Department Committee on Agriculture and Livestock regarding the suspension of the Chief Executive Officer of Mias Sugar Company Limited. Honorable Speaker, on 5th June 2018, the Board of Directors of Mias Sugar Company Limited, through a special board meeting, resolved to suspend Mr. National Seka, the CEO of the company, with immediate effect, under unclear and suspicious circumstances. Later, the board appointed an acting CEO from within the company who is supposed to act in the position until further notice. Honorable Speaker, Article 41, Sub-Article 1 of the Constitution guarantees every Kenyan the right to fair labor practices. It is against this background that I seek a statement from the chairperson of the said committee. Honorable Speaker, in the statement, the chairperson should address the following concerns. Roman 1, the circumstances under which the CEO was suspended. Roman 2, the length of period the CEO will stand suspended, as the board did not give any indications. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Well, of course, I appreciate the fact that as a member of the area, you have a right to raise the matter here. But I thought it would have been a lot easier if the affected person went before the labor court, because they could get faster remedies. But this one, I don't know. The chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture, how long do you think this can take you?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. We have noted the concern of honorable member, and as it were, and as directed yesterday, the committee is already dealing with the issue of national importance, which is the issue of sugar laced with mercury. And so we have only 10 days to report the progress of the committee. What I would suggest, and I request the Honorable Speaker, is that after we do our report on the sugar, then we can be able to handle this case 1 week thereafter. So a week after we finish with the issue of the sugar, sir. Thank you.
Putting into consideration that the committee is working on behalf of the plenary where we are today seated, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, whenever we want to discuss issues that are before the court, we are normally told it is sub judice, that you cannot discuss this matter is before a court of law, Mr. Speaker. Why is it that now judiciary want to participate in the functions of the legislature, Mr. Speaker, when they are saying that we cannot discuss matters before them, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, this is in contravening the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. This is an affront, Mr. Speaker, to the independence of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. Take an example, Mr. Speaker, now. Before the Parliamentary Committee of Agriculture, Trade and Finance, Mr. Speaker, there is this serious responsibility as members of this House, Mr. Speaker, to protect and defend, Mr. Speaker, authorities that have been conferred by the Constitution to this House, Mr. Speaker. And we derive our authority, Mr. Speaker, from the people. It's in the Constitution. We legislate on behalf of the people of this Republic, Mr. Speaker. So when a judge, Mr. Speaker, sits and writes a long judgment that makes the whole House malfunction, Mr. Speaker, the committees of the House cannot function, very soon they're even going to say we cannot sit. A judge might order that, Mr. Speaker, Parliament should only sit once a week. Or when he knows that we are going to discuss issues that are very important, not to watch. When the judiciary becomes rogue, Mr. Speaker, we can't allow one arm of government to become rogue, Mr. Speaker, because even as when we pass here bills, Mr. Speaker, and they are signed by the President, Mr. Speaker, assented to, it is taken to them. They are the ones who interpret. They have suspended many bills that we have passed here. They have suspended the security bill. They have suspended the other one of the bill on this social media, the ICT, cybercrime bill, Mr. Speaker. statute. We have never complained. We keep quiet. We say, let the judiciary interpret the law as we have passed it. If there is any mistake committed, we can amend and rectify them again. But Mr. Speaker, when it is our turn now to do our business, Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether they want to protect cartels, Mr. Speaker, who are supposed to appear before those committees, Mr. Speaker. Because I am foreseeing a scenario where some of these people now who are being called before committees of the House, Mr. Speaker, will end up going to court and getting orders gagging the committee from hearing them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow an arm of government to become a refuge, Mr. Speaker, for cartels and criminals, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to belabor the matter, Mr. Speaker. This House must stand up, Mr. Speaker, and defend, because we are not going to be the last parliamentarians, Mr. Speaker. Parliament existed before us since independence and is going to be there after us, Mr. Speaker. So if we allow this parliament to be mutilated through the judiciary, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, I wanted to reinforce what Honorable Junet was raising, that we will need a statement from you. And I not adjourned Parliament. It does not matter how careless or courageous you are. You do your work in interpreting the law. After it has been passed, don't interfere with the process of passing those laws as a good judiciary. Mr. Speaker, for that reason, we will plead with you to take enough time to give a recent ruling from all jurisdictions that have, and Parliament. There has always been conflict. So, Mr. Speaker, we indulge you or invite you to give a ruling, and also ask members of Parliament and the Parliament itself not to listen to some of those rulings coming out, especially if they are touching on Parliament. You will ignore them with the contempt they deserve. Thank you.
Honourable members, I just want to, I can see there's, I don't know, I can see there are a number of members who want to comment on this, even though the Honourable Junet did not really, he did not specifically say what it is he would want me to do. But let me just do this for the, I am not cutting out members from contributing to this. I can see the member for Suba North has put an intervention, and she appears to be smiling. Honourable members, I rearrange business and go to the order number 8. Clerk.
Order number 8, the Tax Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 11 of 2018, second reading, question to be put.
Honourable members, debate was concluded, and I confirm that we have quorum. So I put the question, which is that the Tax Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 11 of 2018, be read a second time. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as of contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Very well.
A bill for an act of Parliament to make amendments to tax-related laws.
Very well, honourable members, let me do this. Since there was, before we go to the next order, and I know the Honourable Gladys Sholay is very keen to move a motion. She has a balance of 55 minutes, I think, on the first. Yeah. Have you forgotten your own standing orders and the various motions that you passed at the commencement of in February? I will allow a few more comments on this. Member for Suba North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance. Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with Honorable Mbadi that you have pronounced yourself on this issue before, but that doesn't stop you from pronouncing yourself yet again, especially given the decisions that have emanated from the courts of late, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the reason I'm saying that is coming from a civil society background. Mr. Speaker, I defend the rights of the judiciary. In equal measure, I also defend the rights of the legislator. And Mr. Speaker, when we talk about separation of powers, it's not powers that lean on one side. We have 3 arms of government, and each will do its work without interference. And if after undertaking the work, one arm feels the other has undertaken excesses, then you can challenge the work of the other arm. For instance, what has happened in the past is that the judiciary, upon our passing laws which they deem unconstitutional, have declared sections of those laws unconstitutional. But Mr. Speaker, it is unheard of for any judiciary to interfere with the working of Parliament and inject either a committee of Parliament or Parliament as a whole. I don't know which jurisdiction that happens, and that is why I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, perhaps even though you pronounce yourself on this, but perhaps maybe we need a more reasoned argument that borrows from other jurisdictions so that the judiciary can also understand that both in law and in practice, you can't inject Parliament. If they don't like what we are doing as legislature, then they wait when we have done with our work, whatever laws we pass, they can declare them unconstitutional. But they cannot inject us. And in fact, what Honorable Junet is saying, which is utterly ridiculous, can happen if we allowed such a thing to happen, that somebody can go and inject Parliament from sitting. What then happens for the country, especially at a time when we have something as critical as the budget, maybe especially now because our constitution has so many freedoms, including the rights for participation, which I support, public participation, and then somebody goes and says, because I did not participate, Parliament should then not pass the budget. That is how ridiculous it can get. And therefore, especially on the issue of injecting Parliament, Mr. Speaker, that I want to agree. I don't want to comment on the one on privileges, especially because you're saying you are already seized of the matter. But I wanted to speak specifically on the issue because I've really been supporting the judiciary and defending the judiciary. But they must equally respect our role as members of Parliament. They cannot injunct us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well spoken. Of course, Parliament works through committees. So when the judiciary purports to injunct committees of the House, what you are saying, Honorable Millie Odhiambo, is correct, because even the Committee of Budget can be injuncted. So what would that mean? You know, some of these things, perhaps, maybe as Honorable Bandi was suggesting, this is a matter that needs some discussion elsewhere. But member for Kisii County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity so that I may also contribute on this matter. First of all, Mr. Speaker, this is a very weighty matter, and I want to thank Honorable Junet for bringing it up. Mr. Speaker, a time has come where we need to pronounce ourselves in this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that waits on the doctrine of separation of powers, and we must stand and protect our turf, Mr. Speaker. When you get the judiciary interfering, particularly with our internal arrangements, Mr. Speaker, that is how we deal with one another here in Parliament, our internal processes and procedures, and this is our committees, then it means that the judiciary has lost its track. Mr. Speaker, if I recall right, in the 11th Parliament, if you recall, the judiciary even went to an extent of interfering when 2 sister houses were squabbling, when we know very well, Mr. Speaker, the Constitution provides for mediation when the 2 houses are squabbling. But the judiciary went ahead and made pronouncements. Mr. Speaker, if you remember, at that time I was sitting on the other side, but as a lawyer, I felt that indeed that was an interference of our turf. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we urge you, and it behoves upon you, as the number 3 man in this country, to make another pronouncement. It does not matter how many pronouncements you make, Mr. Speaker, but I think it is important that the judiciary respects our turf. I thank Junet for bringing it, and I support him. Thank you.
Well, of course, but I'm always fascinated by the fact of the fact that parliamentary power privileges have always been under attack, but historically not from the judiciary. I mean, if you recall the events, I keep reminding you about the 4th of January, 1642. Lentho came up with the famous words that in this place, he has no eyes to see, and he had no tongue to speak, except as directed by this house, whose servant he was. Which is provided for in Article 165. Or indeed, even to declare laws unconstitutional or illegal should actually vest in the High Court or in the highest court. Because we are dealing with 3 arms. That power perhaps needs to be seated somewhere else. Because then there would be respect. Maybe Honorable Emilio Odhiambo, this is just food for thought. Because yes, at the highest level, at the Supreme Court, I don't think that you would find that kind of interference. There will be time taken to look through. Sometimes there are laws that have been passed by both houses. We have staff who do a lot of research work, including members who also do research. Some of the bills will also have received some very serious expert and professional advice from other quarters, maybe even from the executive. Is it right, within the context of separation of powers, is it right that really, that just a single judge just goes and says, oh, what you have been doing is hogwash? Perhaps food for thought. Maybe it's high time you started looking at whether you should not sit that particular power and function in Article 163, which gives functions of the Supreme Court. And perhaps, indeed, even reduce the authority, the other power of the Supreme Court to deal with appeals, so that they can concentrate on dealing with matters constitutional and legality of laws and advising the government as provided for within 163, giving advisory opinions. Because I think perhaps there may be, then there will be some little bit of respect. But now you give that power to only, you say High Court. So a single judge just goes and says what you have been doing is all nonsense. Then you are told you can appeal, you proceed. Supreme Court says, no, what legislature had done was correct. Is that really what we do? What do we want to, as a country, is this what we want? Perhaps food for thought, Honorable Junet. But it's a matter, I agree that perhaps we need to discuss elsewhere, but I agree also, there's no harm in making further pronouncement that indeed we will look with disfavor attempts at derailing the institution of the legislature. Because when you injunct a committee of the House, essentially you are telling the House not to work. Because the House works through committees. It's committees that generate, all bills go through committees. Committees bring their reports here. If you're not happy, as Honorable Emilio Odhiambo has said, you can go and make whatever interpretation of what is the final product. Because to purport to injunct a committee, which is a creature of the House, is indeed telling the House, you might as well pack off until such time as we will show you, we will tell you when to sit. Petitions have been brought here. Just now, the Honorable Tindi Mwale had the petition he brought, the Honorable Judy Jomo. Then somebody goes and says, stop. Another one goes, stop. So of what use is it to provide in Article 119 that any Kenyan can petition Parliament? So we might as well do away with that Article 19, 119. 165 is within the High Court matter, but I don't want, many of you who are in the 11th Parliament would recall the good work which had been done by the Honorable Peter Opondo Kaluma, touching on 165. And you remember, this House managed 2/3 majority to pass those proposals which he had. And it was indeed, the intention was to safeguard, to secure family, to provide that there can never be any judicial intervention on a matter, consideration of which is provided for by the legislature or its committees, period. Maybe we could reverse it. Honorable Mbowe, I think you remember that very good bill by the Honorable Kaluma. But that is history. Can we go to the business? We will address this matter, Honorable Junet. Next order.
Order number 9, motion. Report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on the Community Land Regulations 2017. Resumption of debate.
Honorable Shale, remember on each of these 3 motions, you have a maximum of 1 hour. So,
Mr. Speaker, sir, the Committee on Delegated Legislation is empowered under Standing Order number 210 to scrutinize all regulations that are published by regulatory bodies. Those are cabinet secretaries and other institutions that are authorized by law to do so. And the committee's job is to ensure that all the laws are comply with the Constitution and also all the applicable laws of Kenya. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, in exercise of the powers conferred by Section 88 of the Community Land Act 2016, the Cabinet Secretary for Land, Physical Planning published the Community Lands Regulations 2017 on the 24th of November via legal notice number 279/2017. Following this publication, the Cabinet Secretary complied generally with Section 11(1) of the Statutory Instruments Act. However, the committee noted that 2 regulations did not comply with the law. Mr. Speaker, the purpose, if we look back and the committee reviewed this, that the purpose of the Community Land Act is to provide for recognition, protection, and registration of community land rights. It's also supposed to ensure and protect the management and administration of community land. The regulations further set out the role of the county governments in relation to unregistered community land. These regulations are these regulations under the Community Land Act and Section 15(1) of the Statutory Instruments Act, regulations to confirm that my committee has no backlog, and despite inheriting 28 pieces of legislation from the 12th Parliament, we have been able to keep up to date with all the pending regulations before. And Mr. Speaker, with that brief motion, I beg to move. And I would like now to kindly request that Honorable Daniel Maanzo, member of my committee on delegated legislation, to kindly second this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Daniel Maanzo. And I hope members can appreciate that these regulations and they follow the reasons which have been advanced. Because we have just been talking about land matters here, and then I can see everybody has gone. You know, so that's one thing. Today, tomorrow, you'll be complaining. You know that, but this is when you are doing business. The other time was that was further other discussion, not business. This is business. Honorable Maanzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me opportunity to second this motion. Mr. Speaker, without belaboring the point, it is crucial to note that natural resources don't lie within the ambit of the county government, and this is in Article 62 of the Constitution of Kenya, and also the 4th schedule of the Constitution of Kenya. And we respect and appreciate the communities and their rights, to resources, traditional rights and all manner of rights in these communities. But when it goes to issues like mining or issues, for example, minerals, you find that there's a Mining Act, and when you go to the issue of petroleum, there's a Petroleum Act. And therefore, the fact that we reasons, and even it's very clear in the Mining Act number 12 of 2016, Mr. Speaker, I second.
Well, I propose a question, which is that this House adopts a report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the Community Land Regulations 2017, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, April 26, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 15 of the Statutory Instruments Act and Standing Order number 210, 4B, annuls Regulations 23 and 24 of the said regulations. Unfortunately, I cannot put the question. You can see. Is there, well, I can see on the request form, the first one is Dr. Pukose. There he is. The next one is Kibiego Ngeno. There he is. The next one is Baya. There he is. And the next one is Mbui Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. It is good that you've realized I'm a serious member of parliament. I don't put my card and disappear. Mr. Speaker, I want to declare that I am a member of that committee on delegated legislation, which has a mandate to ensure that all regulations made in this country by by the bodies that are allowed to make regulations conform to the Statutory Instruments Act. Mr. Speaker, as I begin, I want to thank the committee members for work they've done very seriously under the able leadership of our chair, the Honorable Gladys Boss-Cholei, the vice chair, and a very active secretariat, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this committee is actually faced with several challenges, because what has been happening is that there are two things I've noted about regulations that come to this House. Remember that the purpose of the committee is to actualize every law that passes from this House, and then regulations have to be made so that those laws can now become, can be actualized. Speaker, the things we have noted is one of the problems we face is timely avoidance, and the other one is legislation by the executive, sometimes through the back door. On the issue of timely avoidance, Mr. Speaker, you notice that the Statutory Instruments Act has set a certain amount of time within which the committee must receive the regulations, go through them, and then give a report to the House. Normally, the report would probably be just to annul or to accept it in entirety, because the committee has no jurisdiction to make any amendments. So, Speaker, I have noted severally when the House is about to go on recess is when some of the regulations are brought to the House, and therefore, because of the fact that there's a certain period of time, and maybe that period of time the House is on recess, then what happens is that some of them lapse, and when they lapse, then they take the full force of law. So it is important as we move forward, we figure out whether we can actually make some changes to that act so that we allow a longer period to be able to handle every regulation without any regulation ever being administered to the Republic before this House pronounces itself on them. The other one, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of legislation by the people that are given that mandate to make regulations. And many times we have seen that the CS is given an opportunity to make regulations, but they actually make regulations that go outside the principal act, the act that they're supposed to be following. And Mr. Speaker, these community land regulations regulations is basically one of those ones that actually is going against the Statutory Instruments Act. Our able chair has actually pointed out the two sections where we have a problem, because both regulations 23 and 24 are talking about the issue of exploration of natural resources within community land. Now, Statutory Instruments Act, or the Act. Now, on this case, Mr. Speaker, you notice that the Lands Ministry is trying to create regulations to do with issues of natural resources. Yet, I think these are things that could be handled under the Ministry of Mining, under the Ministry of Natural Resources, under the Ministry of Environment, because to be honest, everything that we do is on land. Everything we do, housing is on land, even schools are on land, but you cannot say that because everything is on land, then therefore, when you're making land regulations, you can legislate for everything. So I think it is important that we announce this so that the ministry can note, and the National Lands Commission can also note their mandate and refine, constrain themselves to only those things that are really their mandate. So with those few words, I want to say that I support the committee's recommendation to annul these regulations in totality, and hope that they will be brought back with those changes already appearing in them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Indeed, I think if that is what is purported to be done, it even offends Article 94 of the Constitution. I think 94.5, that no person, body or authority has power to make provision having the force of law in Kenya except Parliament. So I think it's a good point you've raised, Honorable Mbue. The next one on the list is Osotsi Geoffrey. The next one is Wambugu. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this motion. I want also to, first of all, confirm that I'm also a proud member of this committee, led by our able chair, and I think time has come when I think all the regulation-making bodies realize that the current committee is very keen, very thorough, and we normally go through this regulation section by section, rule by rule, so that we make sure that whatever comes out is something well reasoned and with good reasons. What I may want to add is that I first of all share what Honorable Boya said, that these regulations were in order, apart from Regulation 23 and 24, for obvious reasons. And the same has been said and clearly done by the people of the honorable members who have spoken before me. And the bottom line was that matters of royalties, rent, and compensation surely are not matters to be dealt by the Ministry of Land. And we say these are issues who can be able to be well captured by the acts of Parliament themselves, like what we did recently when we were discussing the bill on petroleum, about whatever the process were to be shared. So with those few remarks, I beg to support.
The next one is the Honorable Serone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I was preparing for the next agenda on the same delegated legislation motion. Thank you.
One is Wanyonyi, Honorable Wanyonyi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want just to support the annulment of this regulation, Mr. Speaker. I also want to declare I'm a member of this committee. Mr. Speaker, we took our time to go through and the process of these regulations, the making and the mandate given to the CS to make the regulations. And some of the mandate, Mr. Speaker, as we looked, as the chair has ably observed, that exceeded their mandate, the mandate given in the Act. And we found this in cross contravention of the legislation because, as Mr. Speaker, as you also observed, that is the mandate of this August House, and the CS can only make the regulations as provided in the Act. So anything that is done outside the parent Act, it becomes in contravention of the law, and that's why we had decided to annul Mr. Speaker. And some of these the CS who are given the mandate to make the regulations, there are some who take it very seriously and they do their work, they do their homework very well, and even when they come to do their presentation, you could see they have understood the mandate given to them, and they have even looked at the other pieces of legislation, and everything comes in focus. So when we are looking at it, Mr. Speaker, we look at wholesome, including other legislation that could be offended by the regulations. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to support and the annulment so that maybe they can be given another chance to go through the regulation and come back and present it afresh. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I must thank the current committee because you've really put in a lot of reports. Is there somebody desirous of contributing to this? Honorable Nyikar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To start with, I really must congratulate the committee because I must say for the first time, I've seen a very clear report on. We are going through a period that things are settling. And therefore, if the ministers actually scrutinize and this committee then scrutinizes, then we'll avoid a lot of wrangles that will come between the two governments. For that, Mr. Speaker, I support the report.
There being no other person to contribute, I call upon the mover to reply.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I think I want to thank the members who have contributed to this particular motion. I also want to appreciate the support that they've given the motion, and it just goes to say that I know that the members of my committee have looked thoroughly to this into this legislation, and we don't take our work lightly, and we have made sure that the regulatory-making authorities actually follow the Constitution and also take seriously the parent statutes that makes them. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and request adoption of this report by the House. Thank you.
Very well. Just to note that indeed this committee's origin was the institution that we were discussing earlier in the day, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, because we never used to have it. But I can see this is a committee which is doing very good work. But I think in the 11th Parliament, members forgot what this committee was all about. And I'm not surprised that the Honorable Nyikal has made the kind of comment that he has about this, because several regulations in the last Parliament went unconsidered. And I must commend the members of this committee. Because of the reasons provided for by Article 121, we will not do what we should do. So we move to the next order.
Order number 10, motion. Report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on the Public Finance Management, Senate Monitoring and Evaluation Regulations 20.
The Public Finance Management, Senate Monitoring and Evaluation Regulations 2018 that were laid on the table of the House on Thursday, April 26, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 18 of the Statutory Instruments Act, Standing Order number 210, and also, Mr. Speaker, it's important for this House to note that if the committee considers the regulations brought before it and it does not annul them or does not consider them within the stipulated time, then they have the effect of law. And therefore, the committee has been working extremely hard to ensure that we don't get regulations become effective by default. These particular regulations that is on this item today were published in exercise of the powers conferred by Section 24 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012. These regulations were published by the Parliamentary Service Commission, and they were published and named the Public Finance Management Senate Monitoring and Evaluation Regulations of 2018 under legal notice number 71 of 2018. Following the publication of these regulations, they were tabled before the House on the 27th of March 2018, and then they were immediately committed to the Committee on Delegated Legislation for scrutiny to ensure that they comply with the Constitution and the Public Finance Management Act. The purpose of these particular regulations was to provide for establishment and operationalization of the fund in exercise of the Senate oversight function over county governments. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee considered the regulations in its sitting that they held on the 21st of April 2018. And once they considered these regulations, they looked at the regulations against provisions of Article 94(6) of the Constitution, the Public Finance Management Act 2012, and the Statutory Instruments Act number 23 of 2013. It also reviewed the regulations against the Interpretation and General Provisions Act, Chapter 2, in which the regulatory making body must ensure that those regulations actually do not offend any of these acts of Parliament. Prima facie, Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Service Commission complied with Section 11(1), yeah, and they actually submitted the regulations to the committee within the stipulated period, and on that we cannot fault them. However, Mr. Speaker, the regulations are inconsistent with Section 205 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012. This particular Section 205 of the Public Finance Management Act empowers the Cabinet Secretary to make regulations pursuant to the Public Finance Management Act. Therefore, the Parliamentary Service Commission cannot make regulations pursuant to the Public Finance Management Act, as it lacks the power to do so. To this end, the regulations therefore were contrary to Section 24 of the Statutory Instruments Act, which provides that the statutory instrument cannot be inconsistent with the provisions of the enabling statute, in this case, the Public Finance Management Act. Therefore, in publishing these regulations, we note that in publishing these regulations, the Parliamentary Service Commission relied on Section 24 of the Public Finance Management Act. It is of importance to note that this section only gives the Parliamentary Service Commission the mandate to monitor the funds, but it does not donate any regulatory making authority on the Parliamentary Service Commission. And that is a very important point, Mr. Speaker, that we'd like noted. I know that the committee have had a lot of difficulties with these particular regulations. I know that there was a bit of unpleasantries that were exchanged with members of the Senate who felt that the National Assembly is being unfair to the Senate by not providing for them the funds to be able to undertake activities in the counties. But I must say, Mr. Speaker, for the record, that the committee has no vendetta with the Senate whatsoever. However, what they made it clear, and I know that some members of the Senate even said to me, forget the law. You don't have to follow the law all the time. We need this fund done. And what I said to most of them is that first and foremost, I'm an officer of the court. I am a lawyer of many years standing. I know people like Mheshimiwa Daniel Maanzo was my student at the university, very prominent, the leader of majority at the Senate, Honorable Murkomen, was my student also. And I said to myself that I cannot, sitting as chair, commit an illegality. What will I explain? What will I tell my students? What would I tell people who know me as a renowned lawyer? And I say I have a reputation beyond parliament. I have a reputation with universities abroad where I'm a guest lecturer. So it's very important that I just do not do something for expediency as a member of parliament. I must do it for my general reputation. And also, Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Delegated Legislation has many distinguished lawyers. There is Honorable Alice Wahome, Honorable Shamala, Honorable Mariro, Honorable Daniel Manzo. There are many senior lawyers within that committee, and I don't think any of them could dare taint their reputation by allowing regulations that definitely offend the Constitution and the Public Finance Management Act. So it's about the rule of law, and we need that to be set on the record so that it's not felt that we are doing what the 11th Parliament did, which is not approve funds for Senate. I think even majority of the members of the committee were not even in the 11th Parliament. So I don't think they even have that memory of what transpired. So that was one reason why the regulations were found to be contrary to the Constitution. Clearly, there was a confusion when these regulations were published by the Parliamentary Service Commission. And what we have asked the Senate to do is to let this go back to the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury to publish the regulations. So we said to them, and I said this many times, it's safer for us to nullify the regulations here than for us to approve it. It will then, Umtata or someone will go to court and they'll be declared unconstitutional, and the matter will be locked in the courts for the next 4 years or so. So it's safer that we nullify the regulations so that they can be brought back and resubmitted to the committee, taking into account that they obey the Public Finance Management Act. There was also another reason why the committee nullified these particular regulations. It was clear that there was inadequate public participation as required by Article 10 and Article 118 of the Constitution, and also pronouncements that have been made by the courts that it is necessary for public participation to be undertaken before any regulations are published. We clearly looked at the explanatory memorandum, which was submitted alongside the regulations, and noted that the National Treasury and the Parliamentary Budget Office and the senators were the only people consulted on these particular regulations. Even members of the National Assembly were not consulted. The county governments were not consulted. And therefore, that's a second reason why these regulations must fail. The third point is that members also found that these regulations were discriminatory to the extent that they do not provide for facilitation of all members of parliament to undertake monitoring and evaluation as envisaged in Section 24 of the Public Finance Management Act. Article 93 of the Constitution of Kenya establishes parliament, and that is both the National Assembly and the Senate, and therefore they should get equal. We have expanded freedom today among members of the public. It could have been, should the committee have approved these regulations, they could have ended up being taken to court in order to test them against their constitutionality and compliance. And we know this very well as Parliament, that there was the case of the Constituency Development Fund, which was declared unconstitutional and struck out by the courts in 2015. We also had the situation where we had the National Government Affirmative Action Fund regulations, which were also challenged in court. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we have not taken the fact that we are nullifying these regulations lightly, because we have looked against history and what the courts have said before. And therefore, the committee felt that it's better, a stitch in time saves 9. In this case, it saves us many court cases. And therefore, it was more efficient and prudent to nullify the regulations and be able to bring it back. And therefore, As I conclude, I want to acknowledge the hard work that my committee have dedicated themselves. And Mr. Speaker, I can repeat this again because you've just come to the seat, is that our committee does not have any backlog. Despite inheriting 28 pieces of legislation, we are up to date, and there is no pending regulations before us. And that is because my committee is extremely dedicated, and I want to appreciate them for that. And with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and kindly request that Honorable Wambugu Munene, member for Kirinyaga Central, and who's also a member of the committee, to kindly second this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to second this motion. And I must say from the onset that the Committee on Delegated Legislation really agonized over these regulations before the committee's decision to annul them. As the chair has pointed out, this is a committee made up of quite a number of good lawyers. I think the chair forgot to also say that I was a student of us. When we looked at this regulation, the enabling section was section 205 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012. But clearly, that section gives the mandate only to the Cabinet Secretary. These regulations were made by the Parliamentary Service Commission, which clearly did not have or does not have the power to do this regulation under that section. And all is not lost. As it has been said by the chair, the Parliamentary Service Commission can always request the Cabinet Secretary to do the right thing and republish these regulations, but after also considering the shortcoming which we also found in the regulation. And with that point alone, I remember the room was very hot, and even we had to call time out because there was, I have to admit, there was out of pressure, especially from the Senate. But we could not save these regulations much as we wanted. We have nothing against the Senate. They are brothers and sisters. We want them to be enabled. We want them to get the money to at least monitor what is happening in the county. But, of course, we must follow the rule. More to that, as if that was not enough, Mr. Speaker, we noted that these regulations, when they were being made, there was no adequate public participation. And we all know, without adequate public participation, which is mandatory under Articles 10 and 111 of the Constitution, regulations or any act of were not consulted. And we believe these regulations really, before they are published, members of National Assembly need to be consulted and their views taken. Lastly, but not the least, we noted that these regulations are discriminatory in nature in view of the fact that they are only providing for Senate only, when the law is very clear that the Parliament consists both of the National Assembly and the Senate. So by providing money for monitoring and evaluation only to the Senate alone and leaving the members of National Assembly, we felt that was also discriminatory. And considering that members of National Assembly actually oversight 85% of the budget, as of when the members of Senate only oversight 15%, we felt that there was quite discrimination. And the issue of there's a false belief that the NGCDF Act, the monitoring aspect there's false belief that it is for the members of National Assembly. That is not true. There is no money provided for the members of the National Assembly in discharging their mandate of oversighting the national budget or the national activity of the national government. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I second.
Yes, even before I put the question, obviously I have to commend the committee because it is one of the most efficient committees of the House. I also hope you are dealing even with the other one of the chairman's manual in your other subcommittee with the same vigor, the chair. So, honorable members, let me propose the question, which is that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislations on its consideration of the Public Finance Management, Senate Monitoring and Evaluation Regulation 2018, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, April 26, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 18 of the Statutory Instruments Act and Standing Order 2010-4B, annuls in entirety the said regulations. So I will give the first shot to the leadership of the minority, and Honorable Junet.
Chair, thank you so much. Mr.
Sorry.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Well, either way, I will give all of you anyway. So,
Chair, don't worry.
I did not realize that you also have the deputy minority leader.
That's right.
Which obviously would have been the one to take over in absence of the minority leader.
Yeah.
But since you are lucky that you have already, and for other reasons, Honorable Junet, including the fact that I can see your card is being used elsewhere.
Yes.
Let us proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I would like to thank the Chair of the committee and the committee, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, for doing a very, very good job. Mr. Speaker, this is one of the most important committees in the House, Mr. Speaker. This is one, and the Chair has shown serious competence, Mr. Speaker. This is the importance of electing learned members to the House, Mr. Speaker. You benefit from that, Mr. Speaker, experience and competence and skills, Mr. Speaker. I'm very much impressed, Mr. Speaker, with the good work the committee has done.
You said you are very impressed with the competence.
Yes.
That is okay.
No, not
Proceed.
anything else, Mr. Speaker. Anything else, I reserve my comments for later, Mr. Speaker, outside the chambers. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the matter is very clear. I don't know where the Senate, whether they're operating within the precinct of Parliament or they're outside. Mr. Speaker, the PMF Act, the Public Finance Management Act, is very clear. It is only the Cabinet Secretary that can publish regulations, Mr. Speaker. They can't just sit down in one corner of the House here, in the parliamentary building, and just come up with their own regulations, Mr. Speaker. These are people who have gone to school. They are lawyers in that house, Mr. Speaker. I used to know it's a house of old men and women, but Mr. Speaker, I knew they also learned it, Mr. Speaker. Even when you retire with the knowledge you acquired in school, Mr. Speaker. You don't leave it outside. You can't just sit in a room and do your own regulations and you expect National Assembly to pass. This is a serious house, Mr. Speaker. They can't pass anything that is contrary to the law, Mr. Speaker. It is only the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, Henry Rotich, who can publish those regulations. Then they come here, take them to the committee, they look at them, whether they are in conformity with the Constitution. Then from there we can think about whether to pass them or not, Mr. Speaker. But even having said that, Mr. Speaker, I don't see any reason why you should give money to the Senate, Mr. Speaker. Money for monitoring, for what, Mr. Speaker? These people are earning salaries, allowances like us. They have mileage allowances, Mr. Speaker. You can, even us, we go with our mileage allowance to the constituency every weekend, Mr. Speaker, and do monitoring. I'm sure the last 1 week, I've not seen you in the house here. You must have traversed the whole of Olonguruweni and everywhere that I can't know the names, Mr. Speaker, with your own money and with your own allowance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a misplaced conception on the functions of the Senate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you go to Article 95 of the Constitution, which covers the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, it says that the National Assembly oversights state organs, Mr. Speaker. And the Senate oversights counties, Mr. Speaker. Revenue allocated to the county government, Mr. Speaker. And then you will find one day, or sometimes on TV, the Senate summoning National Cereals and Produce Board, EACC. Those are state organs, Mr. Speaker, that are supposed to be oversighted by the National Assembly. They have no mandate in this constitution. Senate to go and call EACC, NLC, I don't know, this NCC, National Cereals and Produce Board. Those are state organs under this constitution. They are not county organs, Mr. Speaker. Those are not markets that are found in villages, Mr. Speaker, that you need to call the market inspector to come and ask him how much revenue you have collected or you have not collected, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Senate must know their role. I know the Constitution was new, but now it's no longer new, Mr. Speaker. The Constitution is 10 years old now, almost. And we're even thinking of amending it now so that we can make it better. Mr. Speaker, if up to now they cannot understand their role, Mr. Speaker, their mandate, Mr. Speaker, I'm told this regulation is supposed to give every senator 2 million shillings, 3 million. It cannot happen. Mr. Speaker, that I can tell you for free. It will not happen, and it cannot happen, Mr. Speaker. Every senator should get 3 million shillings to oversight what, Mr. Speaker? Huh? 3 million per constituency. So if I have 8 constituencies in my county, that means 8 times 3. You know, mathematics was long time. 24 million per month, Mr. Speaker. That one. Per year. Even that one is too much. That's a lot. Mr. Speaker, this culture, you know, CDF is different from this. They are thinking that because the National Assembly has CDF, they should also have some money to buy. Mr. Speaker, CDF is not our money. You know the way the courts fought us, the way activists fought us, the way NGOs fought us. We left it. We left it to a committee on the ground. They sit on their own. Actually, a member of parliament now is not allowed to take even a proposal of CDF to the board. Mr. Speaker, will be chased. They will tell you, we can only receive proposals from the chairman and the fund manager. The chairman of CDFs now, Mr. Speaker, are so powerful that they don't not even talk to the MP anymore. He can decide anything to do with that money, Mr. Speaker. Now here, they think because National Assembly has CDF, then us, we must get some money to walk around and loiter around in those counties. Mr. Speaker, we cannot allocate funds for tangatangari, Mr. Speaker. We can only allocate money for the purposes of doing good for the public and for the country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they even went further and saying that it is the National Assembly. We cannot deny our colleagues who are in the same parliament funds, but those funds must be processed in accordance with the law, Mr. Speaker. Must be processed in accordance with the Constitution. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I totally agree with what the committee has recommended, and I totally agree with them that we should annul those regulations because they are contrary to the law, to the Constitution, and to the statutes, Mr. Speaker, and the Senate can do better than that, and they should stop calling national organs of government, Mr. Speaker. They should deal with county government issues, Mr. Speaker. They have no business of calling organs that have been given mandate to the National Assembly by the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity.
If you speak briefly like that, we probably will have many members speaking on it. Let me give on this other side, and by the way, that I'm not governed by the standing orders, because the people who are recognized and whom you voted to give priority is the leader of majority and the leader of minority. The deputies, unless with written permission. So I will give them, because they are almost top on the list anyway, because they are doing very well on the list. So I'll give Honorable Cecil Mbarire on this other side, and then I'll proceed again. Luckily, the leadership are also top on the list.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion by the Delegated Legislation Committee, and first begin by thanking them for a job well done, Mr. Speaker. And just to note, Mr. Speaker, that the chair of the committee has told us that they have no backlog at all. And when they took over, they had 28 legislations waiting on the table. Their in-tray was full, but now it is empty. I think that shows that this is a committee that is committed, but also has a great leadership in the name of Honorable Gladys Sholei, and I'm proud that the women we have elected to these committees are doing a good job. I think that is something that everyone else should follow, both men and women that are leading the various committees, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this motion is...
Honorable Gadhuri Murungi, what is your point of order? What is out of order? Is it that Honorable Cecily Mbarire talked about some good leadership in a committee? I thought I gave you the mic, unless there is a problem with it. Let me check again. No, he has a card. I am not able to, I think there is a problem with that. Come to the, kindly come to the, you press the intervention slot on another seat, please. Or come to the dispatch box.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know Kenyans out there might think that men came to this house to sleep. Mr. Speaker, since you are the chair liaison committee, can you also table names of chairs, men chairs, including Honorable Kadhuri, Honorable Pio Wandai, who are in this house, who are also doing equally good when in the committees that they chair, so that also Kenyans can judge us now objectively, Mr. Speaker.
You see, on this particular one, Honorable Kadhuri, I am only governed by the rules of relevance. Now, true, you are doing such a great job, at the liaison committee and even elsewhere. In fact, there are also other chairs who are doing very well. But on this particular one, what Honorable Cecily Mbarire is doing is simply appreciating a specific committee, and coming from independent, and you also took up the chairmanship of an independent committee. I know you are doing very well. So you will be appreciated very strongly when you bring a report. Proceed, Honorable Cecily Mbarire.
Mr. Speaker, I urge the Honorable Member, my brother Kadhuri, not to get jittery about these great hard-working ladies, because we are also waiting to hear your report.
And also, Cecily,
Honorable Cecily, it is not ladies. We'll give you the same accolades, Mr. Speaker.
It is a lady that you are talking about, not ladies. But I know there are other ladies also who are doing well, including yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, clearly, these regulations were not meant to be. To begin with, the chair has told us that the committee, it was in the finding of the committee that Parliamentary Service Commission has no powers at all to come up with any regulations. So I think we were wrong from day one that we allowed PSC to come up with regulations when we know they shouldn't come up with any regulations of any sort, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also very, very worrying is the fact that there was no public participation. That they came up with regulations where they found it fit to consult the senators, consult Ministry of Finance, but they ignored to consult the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. That in itself, and county government, that in itself was a big oversight on their part, Mr. Speaker, and therefore they need to know that ours is not that the fact that we have any issues with them. We have issues with not following the law and the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, to the extent that we are told of the inconsistencies that are found in the entire regulation, Mr. Speaker, we therefore say no and we nullify. But, Mr. Speaker, let me say something. You know, we are having a problem where every member, when they realize they don't have some money to control, they want to have a little money to control. And by the way, there's no one monitoring the monitoring and evaluation by the Senate. They want to just monitor, evaluate, but there's no one who's going to oversee that process. Mr. Speaker, we know very well today, CDF, even GAF, is subject to audit by the Auditor General. Reports come to Parliament, and we look at them. Who is going to oversee that monitoring and evaluation? What structure have they set in place and in motion to oversee that monitoring and evaluation? And how long, how regular is that M&E? What mechanism have they put in place to ensure that this M&E does actually take place? Mr. Speaker, giving one senator 3 million per constituency for 1 year, that is money that could dig a borehole. That is money that can do a road. That is money that can build a dispensary. Let them monitor from here. They have reports of the Auditor General from the counties. We need to see them more active looking at those reports, Mr. Speaker. They are able to go as committees, and each committee is in charge of a particular ministry. They can go to the counties and look at the work that is going on. Besides, Mr. Speaker, they are only monitoring between 15 to maximum 30% of the national government, of the entire budget. So while this house is actually in charge of close to 80% of the budget, Mr. Speaker, and we are not asking for the same. And may I also remind them, if you look at the CDF Act, only 3% of the money allocated per constituency goes to M&E. Only a paltry 3%. This amount here is not 3%. It is a lot of money. And I think we need to put money into right use. And although they have been told by the chair that they can go and relook at those regulations, they have to convince this house that surely they are deserving of this money, and that we are not giving them money to go and keep campaigning on the ground and giving handouts to people going for meetings and calling them M&E forums, Mr. Speaker. We must put money into good use. With those remarks, I beg to support.
Very well. Deputy Minority Leader. Again, you seem to be having a problem with it there. There you are.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Again, I want to say that I'm a member of this hard-working committee that has been praised a lot. And I rise, Mr. Speaker, to support the decision by this committee to annul these regulations that were brought to this House by the Senate. But, Speaker, before I even mention my points, I just wanted to say that I do support with a heavy heart when I listen to my chair and the seconder standing up and saying that this committee is made up of senior lawyers who have reputations to guard. And so I begin to wonder whether I'm in the wrong committee because I'm not a lawyer. So, Speaker, it's important that even our input in those committees be recognized, because we did play a role. We also were part of this journey all the way from the beginning. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of these Senate monitoring and evaluation regulations is to basically give money to senators so that they can purport to do monitoring and evaluation of county governments. But, Speaker, and this is to the tune of, if you work out like for my county, Machakos, about 2 million shillings a month to the senator to be able to go around, every month for 12 months, to be able to go around and look at what the governor is doing. But, Speaker, and this is supposed to be also coming from a common kitty, the Parliamentary Service Commission kitty, a kitty which is for the whole of Parliament, including the National Assembly. So I think this was a little selfish of the Senate to come up with such, a regulation that favors only them, yet this is Parliament, and Parliament is both houses. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to compare the responsibilities of this National Assembly and the Senate. The Constitution says that county governments will be given 15% of the revenue, minimum of 15%. We have done very well. We've gone beyond 15%, but we are still not yet even anywhere near 50%. The National Assembly, therefore, is obviously going to oversight the difference, which is 85%. But it is interesting that the senators felt that it is important for them to have the funds to go out and evaluate and make sure that they check the governors, despite the fact that they know that we are also oversighting national government and we are not facilitated the way they want to be facilitated. The Constitution gives the responsibility of oversighting county governments to the county assemblies. They have a they have a public accounts committee, every single county. And that is a responsibility that they have. They also have departmental committees at the county assemblies who are given the responsibility of ensuring that they check what the governors are doing. So already we know governors are being oversighted by county assemblies. Now Senate wants to also go and oversight and wants to take a huge chunk of Parliamentary Service Commission budget to be able to do that. Mr. Speaker, I think that is unfair, and we basically felt that that was uncalled for, and other than the technical issues that have been said, I think it was, they're trying to bite off a huge chunk of the budget that is for this house, and the house is of 2 houses. So I think I want to say that we, as a committee, I support the decision to annul in totality the said regulations, and hope that the Senate can find it fit to present regulations that can be discussed by all of us. Make sure that in the public participation, they involve everyone, including this house, because we are major stakeholders, particularly us, because we are a major stakeholder in the budget of the Parliamentary Service Commission. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support.
Honorable, I'm trying to balance both sides, and I see to my left is there's quite a lot of interest. In fact, and I might be tempted to give 2 of them before going to my right. So let's go to Honorable Serone Kipkorir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. To pass a few remarks on this particular regulation, Mr. Speaker, I'm a member of this committee, and when Honorable Mbarire echoed our hard work working, and you, Mr. Speaker, did the same, I want to say, sincerely speaking, the Delegated Legislation Committee...
By mistake, people like Honorable Aguruguru and others. Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the report by this very hard-working committee. I know they are hard-working because I don't think they have any pending business, at least from the information that I have, which means they've really burned the midnight oil to clear all legislation that has been placed before them. But most importantly, on this particular one, it raises some more fundamental issues. The contradiction that we are seeing within what is the work of the Senate vis-a-vis the work of the MCAs, vis-a-vis the work of this House. It's perhaps bringing out a fundamental issue within the implementation of the new Constitution. Because by the time we went to Bomas, for some of us who were there, and there was clamor for we need a Senate, what everyone thought was a Senate that would be an upper house, a house of revision, a house where, national issues will be discussed. But obviously, as we all know that what happened after that, a very nice bicameral system was designed, but when the issues were taken to Naivasha, then our representatives within the committee, who are predominantly members of this House because there was no Senate then, in their wisdom at the point, decided that we will create a House that shall not compete with this House, not knowing it was a House of Parliament. Fortunately, some of them are now in the Senate, and they see the frustration of working in a House that really has no defined role. And hence, this trying to look for work to fill the space, because, work will always expand to fill the space and time allocated for its completion. And that's what Senate is trying to do in trying to look for, we want to go an oversight, which is duplicating the role of the MCAs. And hence, first of all, that idea should not even be entertained about going there and spending money to duplicate the work of the county assemblies. We have given county assemblies money to oversight the governors. Let the Senate redefine itself, because its core job that was left after the law was turned upside down to make the Senate a lower house subordinate to the National Assembly, which is a first in this world. But it happened in Kenya. But when that happened, the only thing that we're left to do is basically to impeach the president or to protect devolution. Protect, not to oversight, not to promote, to protect. Yeah? That we will never pass a law here that purports to kill devolution. Education at the, ECD level. No, here I am sitting and worried about education at the university. And they are calling the same people to, as if the ECDs, we can't do the ECD work. But because of these discrepancies, I think it's time we seriously need a rethink of that model, and our committee should actually take it, and because the chair is also, the speaker is also the chair of the liaison, if you can help us, because coordination of even this committee work is becoming a problem because of the interferences of the Senate, because they are idle and they need some work to do. So if we can now define their work and let National Assembly do its work, we will be giving Kenyans value for money. So that the fight about corruption is not just about, the issues we are hearing there. Misuse of public funds through doing the wrong job is also part of misuse of public funds. That's corruption, right? We need to fight all these things holistically. And part of it is actually in terms of getting, defining clearly. So this has been a good eye-opener in terms of wanting to use lots of money, public funds, to do what is already funded to be done through MCS. And I'm glad that the committee has seen it fit that this, all these regulations should be annulled in their entirety. And any attempt to reintroduce them in whatever other form should suffer the same fate. With those words, Mr. Speaker, I wish to request that this matter be taken up one notch higher. We define the Senate. Whether we have to go for a referendum, I would rather we go for a referendum to actually make sure we have a Senate that works, if nothing else. And then we sort out the bilateral workings of these houses. With those words, I beg to support.
Very well, let's have the member for Butula, Honorable Yula Maero.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to comment on this motion. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by commending the committee for the work well done. The committee has come up with a good decision to nullify the entire regulations that were brought to this House. Mr. Speaker, making of financial regulations is not an easy job. Whoever comes up with regulations must comply with the laws, the relevant laws, Mr. Speaker, and the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the committee has done the best thing because Parliament would be taken as rubber stamping any regulations that are brought to this House. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, commend the committee for hard work, for going through all the regulations and coming up with a decision which is commendable. Mr. Speaker, all the committees should look carefully at any regulations brought to this House, and particularly financial regulations. If we relax on these regulations, we open up a gap for manipulation and misappropriation at a later date. So, Mr. Speaker, I think what this committee has done is commendable, and I support their decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. And next, I give Honorable Akinyi Ochang Buyu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. And I'd like to join my colleagues in commending the Committee on Delegated Legislation for the good job that they've done. Mr. Speaker, we listened to the chairperson say that she was under duress with people trying to plead with her to actually go against the law and pass the regulations. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend them because Parliament is a house that is supposed to be custodian of the laws since we make the laws. And under no circumstance should Parliament actually be seen to go against the very laws that it makes. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to say that we seem to misunderstand the role of oversight as given in the Constitution. The role of oversight is not to individual members of Parliament. That is a collective role that should be undertaken within committees. Mr. Speaker, when you begin to give individuals 3 million shillings per constituency on their individual basis to go and oversight, that is a recipe for conflict within our counties. Mr. Speaker, the money will not find its way into doing oversight because that role has already been is being undertaken by the members of the county assembly. This would enhance conflict between the senators and the governors, and for the better part of the years, there would be no work going within the counties. Mr. Speaker, we also know that the Constitution stresses on public participation, because through public participation, stakeholders are able to partake and are also able to have their interests taken into the laws that we come up with. When there's no proper public participation, that law or that regulation must not be allowed to see the light of day. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that the role of Parliament, especially in an economy like ours, where we are already overburdened by debt, we should not be seen to be duplicating roles. Oversight of the county government or oversight of the governors in the county government is a role that's already being undertaken by the county assembly. Why then should we give senators money? Or why then should senators be granted money to go and do exact role that's already being carried out by somebody else, especially in an economy that's so overburdened by debt? I think that money, like Honorable Barire said, should find its proper use to other areas which will actually impact positively on the lives of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I support. Thank you.
Okay, let's have Honorable yes, top then on the list. This other side is Honorable Wanjiku Waruguru.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for donating me this moment to contribute, but I'll be very brief. We are very anxious about the upcoming report from the Lands Committee in regards to the Ruaraka land scandal. But however, Mr. Speaker, I must say a good job has been done by the Committee on Delegated Legislation, and I must commend them for remaining very firm and allowing themselves not to be swindled by the Senate. Mr. Speaker, it must be very clear that there must be guidelines, and in my case, even as a woman rep, there is a committee which sits and decides money is allocated to Laikipia for GAF, for what purposes it is intended for. In this case, the senators then they need to give us regulations, tell us who are going to manage this money, what this money is meant for. And in this case, because they do not have an agenda which is based on the Constitution in regards to implementation, because the role of the oversight is clearly bestowed on the county assemblies. And we have very vibrant pick and pack committees in the county assemblies, Mr. Speaker. It would only mean this would be a duplication. I must share my frustration as a member of Lands Committee. Mr. Speaker, anytime we want to do an inquiry or we want to do investigation, by the time you're calling on the permanent secretaries and the CSs, they're already dashing in some committees in the Senate. And therefore, the duplication of roles between committees in the National Assembly and committees in the Senate, Mr. Speaker, it must be clearly defined. What is the role of a senator? What is this bill or policies that they can pass, which do not necessarily need to come to the National Assembly? And one of it, Mr. Speaker, we usually, and we've been kind enough to pass the revenue bill for the counties, Mr. Speaker. So in this case, I must say, Senate must stay clear and put. And from the onset, upon the inception of the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution, Mr. Speaker, I must say as a House there was a mistake, because this is the time we should have streamlined clearly the roles of the committees in the National Assembly and the roles of committees in the Senate, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, for this case, I also say I oppose them, I support them in opposing, Mr. Speaker, this allocation fund, and I want to preempt that in the next coming supplementary budget, Mr. Speaker, this money should be given to these legislators so that they can attend so many emerging issues and matters, Mr. Speaker, which are riding on our backs as members of parliament. In regards to that, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that county assembly members should not be intimidated. Nobody should look at them as if they do not know their work. They are ready to serve, and that they should wait for their guests, who are the governors, to appear before committees, and not them looking for governors in their kitchens and in their wardrobes, Mr. Speaker, because this will only bring conflict of interest. I'm looking forward to hear them table before us. Audit reports, Mr. Speaker, for the last, not the last financial year, but for the first governance, Mr. Speaker, which they have not yet completed. I mean, I don't get it. We don't understand it. Our good brothers in the other house must take a put, and you remain in your territory. You know, Mr. Speaker, even as a wife, you really know what your duties are, Mr. Speaker. The duties of a man, the duties of a woman, and what are the duties of everybody, including the children, Mr. Speaker. They are our elder brothers, so we want to tell them, let them remain clear. Please maintain your roles and do what is needful. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Honorable Jeanette, please hold your horses. Wait.
Let's have a honorable member for Emurua Dikir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I wish to support this motion. And I also wish to state categorically that, Mr. Speaker, roles which were stated by the Constitution must be adhered to. The functions that the Constitution put upon us, Mr. Speaker, must be followed. We cannot purport to be doing that is not provided for by the Constitution. And I would wish the senators, if some of them would want to feel like they want to participate, especially on matters which are concerning the national government, they have a freedom to come back to this House. For those of us who also would want to have interest in doing things that concern counties, we have the freedom moving to the other House. Mr. Speaker, where I only want to differ with members is that we must also understand that senators are idle people, and we need to give them more responsibilities. We need to make them move around the counties, even if it is to oversight the MCAs, even if it is to oversight the governors, because they are very idle people. Otherwise, they will be conflicting their interest with ours. You will be hearing them every other day, summoning the Vice Chancellor of the University of Nairobi. You wonder, what has that to do with the county governments? You will hear them summoning Minister for Foreign Affairs. We do not have ambassadors representing counties in this country. So why would they even, what do they have to do with them? So I think, Mr. Speaker, we will need to be fair enough to allocate them some money so that instead of being idle in Nairobi, they should go idling in the counties where they're supposed to be taken care of. Mr. Speaker, I just want us to sit one day and make sure that we also look at how these people should be working, because we also don't want them to be earning a lot of money and doing nothing. We want them to be functioning. We want them to be working. And of course, you know, like my brother here was telling me about the governors. Governors feel prejudiced when they appear before the MCAs. They would want to feel big when they appear before the senators. So I think if there's something that needs to be changed so that they can also feel comfortable appearing before the senators, then let's do that. The Speaker, let's do that so that we can make people comfortable. But what we want is proper representation. If counties, if senators are representing counties, we want also value for the money which are sent to the counties. And that one we need not to compromise. So if this will allow them to make sure that governors work properly, then let's allocate them something small to go around, to enable them be mobile in the counties. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, so next we will have going to...
Can annul the whole regulation, because if it violates that clause, then there's no need for us even to go further to look at the regulations. So it is very serious, and this should be something that should be taken seriously by all those regulation-making authorities. And the other thing, Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Service Commission had no mandate to make these regulations. Only the CS Treasury, Mr. Speaker, will have been given the mandate. Maybe they should have asked him to do it on their behalf. And that's why we, when we looked at it, we saw a glaring violation of the law, and we had to deal with that seriously by recommending for annulment. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that our brothers in the Senate, I think when they were here, in this, most of them were in this house when they were passing the Constitution, and they wanted a weak Senate. And immediately after election of 2013, they realized that they ended up in that house, and they wanted to allocate to themselves some powers which was outside the law, and that's why they're struggling to find some relevance somewhere. But I will also encourage them to do some benchmarking. Maybe if they go and look at the House of Lords, how it works. They don't sit every day, Mr. Speaker. They only sit when there's need. And I don't think the Senate has got so much work that they should be sitting every day. They can be sitting only when there's need, when they want to do some oversight role. And the oversight role, they can do it. They can just be moving around, and I'm sure Senate has enough budget to facilitate that. Mr. Speaker, I think this regulation, annulment of this regulation will give the PS, the CS another chance maybe to look into it if they'll present them, and then we can look at it, Mr. Speaker. So we are just trying to assert our authority as a National Assembly, and we are sending a signal that, Mr. Speaker, we will not be a rubber stamping house, but we are taking matters very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and for giving me a chance to contribute.
Okay, Honorable Sotsi. Absent, so Honorable Rachel Nyamai.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I would like to support this report by the Committee on Delegated Legislation, and to say that it makes one to wonder what activities that the senators will be doing at the counties. Because as many honorable members have said, this is a duplication of the roles of the work that is already being done by the members of county assemblies. Number two, Mr. Speaker, there is already a lot of work that the senators are supposed to be doing in oversighting governors. So far, we hear many complaints in public rallies and funerals on how money is being misused at the county level. The question is, have they exhausted the work that they are supposed to do for them now to want to be making trips and spending 2 million per month, 3 million, depending on the county where you come from. From the county of Kitui, this will amount to 2 million shillings per month for the senator to move around to do the same work that is being done in the Senate, in the county assemblies. So to me, I would like to support. Two, the question is, do we have lawyers, advocates, who are supposed to advise Parliamentary Service Commission? Did they seek support before they came up with these regulations? Honorable Speaker, as I support the committee and agree with the other honorable members that they are doing a very good job, I would like to say that it seems that there is a problem. Because even when we were investigating this matter of land in Nairobi, we realized that the Senate, even after this House had taken up the matter, the Senate also was investigating the same. So is it that they do not have enough work to do? Is this, as Honorable Kimunya was saying, does it now call for a referendum for us to see whether we would like to ask ourselves, one, is it important to still have the Senate, or do we change the roles that Senate should be taking? Honorable Speaker, I would like to say that I support, and as I would also like to join my colleague, Honorable Waruguru, that the Parliamentary Committee on Lands is looking forward to moving a motion on the matter of Ruaraka land. I support, Honorable Speaker.
Member for Njoro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let me start by saying congratulations to the committee which came up with all what they have done. Mine is very simple, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question I will be raising is to ask, what would be their, what is their best mechanism if it was to be implemented? Also, I would be questioning, would it bring some conflict and the duplications of work which are done by others? And the second thing I'll be asking Mr. Speaker, it's actually, where does the process start and where does it end? When I was trying to do some small mathematics, I realized we would be talking of 870 million per year. That is just for oversight. I found it is a very big amount of money. And I was trying to consider, and I was asking, if it is calculated per month, I realized someone will be using 250,000 Kenya shillings. And when I checked that amount of money, I found it very big. Seeing the challenges some of us are facing, actually, like my constituency, Joro constituency, when I was trying to give out my bursary, I realized I did good work, but there are still some people I could have considered. Now, when I check this amount of money, I find it to be on a very high note. Probably, it should be rechecked. It is very high. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'm rising to say, it might bring some duplication of works in the counties. It might also result to conflict. And as members of parliament who make laws, I think we should have serious policies which are going to ensure we are doing the right thing. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me just say it was good work done by the committee, which we really appreciate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Very well, Honorable Oduol, Adhiambo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like, Mr. Speaker, on the outset to appreciate the extremely meticulous work that has truly indicated that the National Assembly is taking very seriously its role as defined in the Constitution and expected by the people. Mr. Speaker, given the comments that have been made by a lot of the colleagues, with which I concur, I wanted, Mr. Speaker, to mention or weigh in a little bit on how we need to look at the functional placement and to see the extent to which we can make good use of the roles as currently defined. Mr. Speaker, if we look at our Constitution, then we would see that Article 96 gives the Senate the responsibility to protect the interests of the counties, as has indeed been mentioned by Honorable Kimunya. And Mr. Speaker, in the social media, there was information that indicated that the County Assembly of Kisii seemed to have abrogated itself some role and determined that they were going to come up with some legislations that would keep the women legislators who are nominated in the county assembly from participating in the very legitimate role that at the county assembly they should be carrying out, which would be legislation, oversight, and representation. Mr. Speaker, I mention this because, as I indicate, this was in the social media, but we are aware, Mr. Speaker, that the social media does seem quite a number of times to capture the temperature and mood, and sometimes just blatant, a failure to follow law have led to this kind of situation. So, Mr. Speaker, if I refer to Article 96, and notwithstanding that we would want to allow greater clarity, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the Senate could do a lot more by trying to look at the interest of the counties, to protect them, and in particular, given the manner in which the transitional authority, even as it did its work of seeking to set systems and enable the counties to work effectively, did not get to do this. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to indicate that it would be useful that the Senate, as it seeks to perform the very important role of monitoring and evaluation, would begin by looking at these existing challenges that are really sticking out. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, because I know that we have already spoken a lot on the matter.
Sorry, is this lady working in a member? Well, okay, I now recognize her now. People have changed. So let's proceed, finalize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, because I did hear the Honorable Junet, my whip, Mr. Speaker, refer to age and indicates that perhaps when we look at the Senate, we tend to see them being a little more on the older angle. I wanted, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that Article 11 of the Constitution talks about culture, and Article 10 talks about national values. And Mr. Speaker, there's a sense in which the older people are, sometimes because of experience and a lot of learning, they tend to have wisdom, which can be useful. And so I hope that as we look at this matter, we will not necessarily be trying to imply that the Senate might not be doing this in a way that is deserved because of their age, because, Mr. Speaker, a number of us might be finding that they get to that level. So I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg to support.
The reason why your time is over is because it was supposed to be discussed for 1 hour, which is ending at 5:43. So it is now the time for the mover, unfortunately, to reply, because the leader of minority would have spoken. But I had given, so it's unfortunately, you will speak in the next one and you'll be the first one, Honorable Leader. But let me just give 2 minutes only. Only 2 minutes. Only 2 minutes, and strictly 2 minutes. It is not normal that I can bend rules. But I'm just using the relevant standing order number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for indulging me. Mr. Speaker, probably my colleagues have said a lot, and I want our colleagues in the Senate to understand that the objection to these regulations is not because we don't want the citizen engagement on issues affecting the counties by undertaking civic education and community sensitization, basically holding public barazas and maybe paying people sitting allowance. To me, it is like giving handouts. Mr. Speaker, because the time is short, actually I thought I would have enough time. I want members to understand, actually, I had members talk about 3 million per constituency. I don't know where they got that. This is how it is. The nominated senators will get 6% of the fund. 1% will go towards administration, another 1% to the board. 92% goes to elected senators, and there are 47. If you allocate 1 billion shillings, each senator every month will have 1,631,206 per month to do the work of holding meetings, to do the work of expenditure tracking. You know, let us be serious here. And then if it is 2 billion, as they had proposed earlier, that is 3,262,411 per month per senator, 47 of them, because the other nominated are only allocated 6%. And the amount we have allocated in the budget would still give them 815,602 per month. And the functions, Mr. Speaker, of what they are using this money for is expenditure tracking, is to hold meetings, to give capacity to educate people on devolution. Now you ask, then, who is educating then people on the national government funds? Then do we give money also to members of National Assembly to also go and hold meetings? And where will it end, Mr. Speaker? The MCAs will also demand money to educate people. Mr. Speaker, for me, if we think, and this is my last one, if senators, and maybe for good reason, they feel they have a larger geographical area to monitor, let them just come and tell us that the money we are allocating for constituency office is small, we increase it for them. And in which case, we should also give women reps also more, because they also have a bigger geographical area. So in my view, Mr. Speaker, I want to put it clearly that, honestly, even without looking at those reasons, senators need to sit down with us
and agree with us, what is this money for? In fact, I called it in the meeting, budget committee meeting, that they are asking us to give them 3 million per month for pocket money to go and give people in the villages. Because that is what they would do it for, honestly. The expenditure tracking, you can't use this money to expenditure track. There is already a system tracking expenditure, and it is even being published in the Gazette, Mr. Speaker, by the Controller of Budget. So the expenditure tracking, they can't do it. It is just about holding public barazas, giving people pocket money, and then members of National Assembly, you will be seen as mean people. Because you have no money to give, yet a senator there is calling, when he calls a meeting. In fact, Mr. Speaker, let me say this. If we give this money to senators, chances are people will not be coming for our meetings. Because when the senator calls them, he gives them handouts. Say 1,000 shillings each to go back home. You, when you call people for meetings, you leave them like that. Who will come for your meeting, Mr. Speaker? Thank you.
Thank you. So please, in a minute, reply, Honorable Manzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Chair for the Committee of Delegated Legislation, the Honorable Gladys Cholet, who is now in the Justice Committee. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the members of the Delegated Committee and members of the National Assembly who has made contribution in this matter. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the deliberations were exhaustive. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that, I'm pleased to say that, Mr. Speaker, I wish to reply.
Mr. Speaker. No. Hii mambo ni ngumu.
The Honorable Unit, you have the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to draw your attention before you move to the next item, item on the order paper. Mr. Speaker, we are at order number 10. But Mr. Speaker, then we are moving to 11. But Mr. Speaker, there is order number 12 on report on of the implementation of the Committee on Lands on the inquiry into alleged land irregularities. That if this matter can be stepped down to be the first item on Tuesday, Mr. Speaker, because it requires a lot of attention, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, that's my proposal, Mr. Speaker, so that we have enough time to debate it, Mr. Speaker. Then being put, because 5 members will speak on it, then the question will be put, and that will be the end of the story. I'm not saying that yours should not be debated. Yeah?
The Honorable Unit, I've heard you, but I wish you to note that the regulations that you're dealing with, and particularly in the next order that is on our order paper, they have timelines. They have timelines. They have to be dealt with within certain timelines. So if we don't deal with them now, then we may run into trouble with them. What I would probably ask members is that they deal with the next order as fast as possible so that we can get to the other one. But your suggestion was that we step down what appears as order 12. Is that so? To step to 12, to take out 12. Yes, I think I had you right. Your proposal is to take out 12 so that we deliberate on it on another date. You ready? Well, the chair for Lands is here, probably. Are you ready, Chair? She's ready. I think the Honorable Jeanette, if there's an item before her and your proposal is actually to take it out, probably then if we deal with the next item, we might not even reach this other one. Or we deal with it and then we carry over to Tuesday. So I think, yeah, your concerns are actually, this has generated a lot of concern among the general public. But, honorable members.
First, you can pronounce that this is the question you put.
Yes, honorable members, let us, honorable members, the honorable leader of a minority, I think we need to have direction on how to proceed. We shall proceed in this manner. We shall not be able to put question on what we have just finished on order number 10 because of quorum reasons. I'll therefore direct that we move to the next order. Yes. Next one.
Order number 11, motion, report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on the Civil Aviation Remote Piloted Aircraft Systems Regulations 2017.
The Honorable Manzo, it is you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to move on behalf of the Chair for Delegated Legislation, the Honorable Gladys Chalet, who is now at the Justice Committee. Honorable Speaker, in exercise of powers conferred to Section 82 of the Civil Aviation Act 2013, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development published the Civil Aviation Remote Piloted Aircraft Systems Regulations 2017 on 6th October 2017 via legal notice number 259/2017. Following the publication, the Cabinet Secretary, in compliance with Section 11(1) of the Statutory Instrument Act, submitted the regulation to the National Assembly on 21st November 2017, which then the Select Committee on Review and the Structures, Delegated Legislation, Statutory Instruments Act 2013 and Standing Order 2010 of the National Assembly Standing Orders. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee extensively considered the regulation in several sittings between January 2018 and 15th May 2018, when the decision to annul the regulation was made. In considering the regulations, the committee conferred with the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, KCAA, pursuant to Section 16 of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013, both at Parliament Building and their office headquarters in Embakasi, Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, the remote piloted aircraft system, also commonly referred to as drone or unnamed aerial vehicle, is an emerging issue in Kenya. Although the technology has been in existence in other parts of the world for decades, drones were first introduced in 1849 by Austria, who sent unmanned bomb-filled balloons to attack Venice. Various conventions have since addressed the drones issue, that is, Paris Convention, the high-level requirements for contracting states, Article 3 and 8 of the Convention related to operation of the drones. Mr. Speaker, international standards to regulate certain aspects of drone operation are currently being considered by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. There is a manual on remotely piloted aircraft system that is of 2019, of 2010, and Honorable Speaker, a drone is simply defined as aircraft without human pilot abroad. Mr. Speaker, also, the flight of drones may operate with various degrees of autonomy, either under remote control or by human operator, or autonomously or on board computers. Mr. Speaker, the committee noted and compared to manned aircraft, drones were originally used for mission considered too dangerous for humans. Drones were originally used for military application. However, their use in rapidly expanding to commercial, scientific, recreational, agricultural, and the other applications such as policing, peacekeeping, and surveillance, product deliveries, aerial photography, agricultural, smuggling, and drone racing. Civilian drones now vastly outnumber military drones, with the emphasis to establish proper regulatory controls to ensure safe, harmonized, seamless integration of drones into the aviation system. Mr. Speaker, the increased use of drones for civilian application has presented many countries with regulatory challenges. Such challenges include the need to ensure that drones are operated safely without harming public and national security and in a way that would protect areas of national, historical, and natural importance. Mr. Speaker, in considering the regulation, the committee noted and found out that there was an influx of drones into the country and that Kenya is yet to develop a regulatory framework. The committee also was not convinced that the provisions in the regulations as published by the Cabinet Secretary for Transport adequately address safety concerns and privacy of persons and property. The committee found that there is need for further improvement of the regulations. Honorable Speaker, the Statutory Instruments Act and Article 118 and 10 of the Constitution provide that the stakeholder consultation be undertaken, especially among the industry players. For example, the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government, and the media. However, the committee observed that the regulations were not adequately subject to public scrutiny, especially at county level. The authorities sought to conduct a public sensitization of the drones regulations and established linkages with the county governments and the media industry. Honorable Speaker, the committee also observed that licensing fee to register drones are prohibitive, hefty, and hard to discriminative on and classification use of drones. Kenya shilling 200,000 was deemed too hefty, especially for SMEs, e.g. photographers. KCAA also reported that they have received similar complaints and are working on reviewing the fees. The committee also learned that KCAA plans to procure surveillance equipment on investment. There is need for solid legislative guidelines before any investment is made on the drone surveillance. Having considered the said regulations pursuant to provisions of Article 94(6) of the Constitution, the Civil Aviation Act 2013, and the Statutory Instrument Act number 23 of 2013, and the Interpretation and the General Provisions Act, Chapter 2, which regulate the making, scrutiny, and publication of the regulation. The committee observed that the Statutory Instrument Act states that regulations cannot prescribe penalties exceeding that provided by the parent legislation. Therefore, the penalty imposed by Regulation 56 of 5 million or 6-month imprisonment or both contravenes Section 82 of the Civil Aviation Act number 21 of the 2013, which allows for the imposition of a fine not exceeding 2 million or 3 years imprisonment. Regulations cannot prescribe beyond the substantive statute. The regulation-making authority, Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, did not undertake adequate public participation as required by the Statutory Instruments Act and Article 10 and Article 118 of the Constitution, and public participation, read together with Section 5 and 11(2) of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013. In addition, pursuant to Section 13(q) of the Statutory Instruments Act, the committee raised constitutional concerns regarding the issue of safety, security, and infringement of rights to personal privacy and the Bill of Rights, which implied but not prima facie latent on the regulation and which were not sufficiently addressed by the regulation making authority during their elucidation, hence contravening Article 2(4) of the Constitution and Section 13(h) of the Statutory Instruments Act. This is also been found that drones can be used for to drop bombs, drugs, also biological weapons, Mr. Speaker. They can also be used to commit assassinations. The regulations as published require further amendments to address various pertinent issues, including reviewing of licensee fees and privacy concerns, among others. Honorable Speaker, sir, having considered the Civil Aviation Remote Piloted Aircraft System Regulation 27,
What is happening to the Honorable Manzo's mic? It's on and we can't hear you. Very well. Proceed, Honorable Manzo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the interpretation of the General Provisions Act, Chapter 2, which regulate the making, scrutiny, and publication of regulations, and having extensively conferred with the regulation-making authority, the committee recommends that, pursuant to Standing Order 210 4B and Section 15(1) of the Statutory Instrument Act, the Civil Aviation Remote Piloted Aircraft System Regulation 2017 be annulled in entirety for the aforementioned reasons. Honorable Speaker, as I conclude, allow me to acknowledge the tireless efforts of the members of the Committee on Delegated Legislation for exceptional commitment to serve in ensuring the committee delivers on its mandate. Honorable Speaker, I must add that committee has no pending legislation before it, despite having inherited 28 pieces of legislation from the 11th Parliament. On behalf of the committee, the Honorable Speaker, I wish to thank you for the support accorded to the committee in discharge of its mandate. Our appreciation also goes to the Clerk of the National Assembly and the supporting directorates for providing necessary technical support. Mr. Speaker, part of what happened when we visited the authority, we were shown a video, Mr. Speaker, where an aircraft collided with a drone, and the passengers escaped death narrowly, a huge aircraft in one of the parts of the country. We also noted that, Mr. Speaker, upon checking with other countries what is happening, drones are used for security installations exclusively. Although in Rwanda, they are used for medical, to transport blood from hospital to hospital. But largely, there are also very many drones, Mr. Speaker, which have been apprehended at the airport by the authorities. We also noted that the security systems and installation in this country were not very well represented, and this be a very, very serious security issue, Mr. Speaker. And also noted that one of our members here, while going through the last campaign, was being surveilled by drones from our house, such that, you know, a drone can be sent and can photograph and can monitor your movement. And some drones, Mr. Speaker, are as small as a bird. So you can think it is a flying bird only to realize that it's a weapon. So for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, we are now, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and request the Honorable Saranay, who is also a member of the Great Committee of Delegated Legislation, to second, Mr. Speaker.
Very well, Honorable Saranay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I stand here to support the motion on drones, Mr. Speaker, I am a member of this committee, and I have attended all the meetings on this, on this committee on the regulations that we had, the 28 of them. So as I stand here to support Mr. Speaker, I would like to, to second Mr. Speaker, is that I would like to mention the recommendation of the committee was that having considered the civil aviation in quote remote piloted aircraft system, Regulation 2017 against the Constitution of Kenya, the Civil Aviation Act 2013, Statutory Instrument Act number 23 of 2013, and the International and General Provision Act, Chapter 2, which regulates the making, scrutiny, and publication of the regulation, and having extensively conferred with the regulation making authority, the committee recommended that pursuant to Standing Order 2010-4B and Section 15.1 of the Instrument Act, the Civil Aviation Remote Piloted Aircraft System Regulation number 2017 be annulled in entirety. Mr. Speaker, one, the reason why, among other reasons, why we actually annulled this regulation was that there was no public participation. When we visited the KCA, they confirmed to us that they did not have public participation, and any regulation that is being brought to the House without any public participation, Mr. Speaker, sir, we will not allow to go, because the Constitution, it is a mandatory through our Constitution that all regulation must face the public participation. Mr. Speaker, there are several other issues that the citizen must be involved and participate at the various stages of the legislative process, and hereby enhance the civic culture of the Kenyan people. It makes government more responsive and responsible. For further, it is awesome that legal counsel that advises various government agencies in the executive are not abreast of the Statutory Instrument Act. Mr. Speaker, published regulations that is in outright violation of the Act that governs the making and the scrutiny of delegated legislation is indeed serious. Mr. Speaker, I will request you to protect me. There's too high consolidation around here. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, definitely, you must be protected.
Or underrated. Mr. Speaker, sir, I was personally involved in the various discussions with the Regulation Making Authority, that's Kenya Civil Aviation Authority. I happened to have visited their offices when they presented the demonstration, and then we went through the various sections of the regulations. One matter came out very clearly, that yes, they admitted themselves that the regulations were hurriedly prepared in order to contain the increasing number of requests or applications they were having for licensing of drones to undertake various actions and services in the country. It was obviously did not match international standards, and we actually asked them where did they ever benchmark. And indeed, they admitted they had sat on the laptop, on their desks, Wikipedia, downloads here and there, patched up documents that were incoherent, badly drafted, even to a layman, a first-year student at the University of Nairobi doing law would have done a better job than what they had done. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, sir, we cannot wish away drones. That is a fact. The drones have been used in many jurisdictions, even though with very, very strict regulations and rules. In Kenya, we need drones for mapping. In view of the very low rate of demarcation and mapping in this country, we must find ways and means of hastening mapping to ensure that all lands in this country are titled. We need drones to monitor wildlife movement, to avoid poaching. The examples are endless why we need drones. But drones come with two serious challenges that as a country we must address. The first one is the issue of privacy. Due to the small nature, due to the remote controlled, we fear they could easily infringe on personal privacy. I remember a hilarious case to all activities that you are undertaking, whether they are good or bad, and generally damage your reputation. All what you are doing to unauthorized persons, generally endangering personal relationship wherever they are. But most importantly was how do we manage to prevent drones from gathering intelligence information on our security system, military operations, and the rest, and relaying the same to the enemies of the state. So consequently, we advised Kenya Civil Aviation Authority to thoroughly tighten up the regulations and probably seek a case where we restrict drones, the use of drones to military, the security system, and probably recognize research institutions, mapping organizations that can be trusted to ensure that whatever they do is for the benefit of the country and nothing else that will harm the security of our country. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, sir, the gist of many legislation is normally in the regulations. I want to urge all members of our committee and all other committees that we must take adequate care, adequate attention, keen attention on the regulations, because that's where the details are. That's where, quite, if you are not keen, many regulation-making authorities or state departments might actually contravene the provisions of the Parent Act by sneaking clauses or requirements in the regulations that will tend to hurt the ordinary wananchi. As much as we have annulled these regulations, we told them to go back, do a thorough job. Once they are ready, they can bring back the regulations. We review together with them because they have very many pending applications. It's also a good avenue to make some little money so that we don't keep on complaining we are having cash flow challenges. And indeed, we have so many pending assignments that needs to be done that could easily be done by drones. It's upon them now to move with the speed to ensure that they revise the same, align to international standards, but also take care of our national security and personal privacy. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support the motion to annul the regulations in entirety.
The Honorable Undo, I hear you echoing the great Lord Denning, Master of the Records, that great judge from England, who said that whatever a man and or a woman gets up to in a bedroom is entirely their business and must remain in the realm of the private. And I hear you now protecting that. Thank you very much. We shall have the Honorable Tutoek Cameron, member for Mogotio.
Speaker, the remote piloted aircraft systems, Mr. Speaker, is a very vital new technology. I know the use of these particular aircraft systems are varied, but I'd like to rise and say, personally, I think the issue about the drones is that the drones are good. Right now, we need to use them for various purposes. The issue of security has been emphasized, which is now in use widely. The use of photography, the use in photography is also used. The use of drones is good in photography. The experiences which you are seeing in places like Rwanda, used in terms of carrying medicine to far-flung areas which are remote, underlines the importance of this equipment. Has been outlined by the mover of the motion that whereas we admit that this particular instrument is good to be used, we also should know that we need to use it within certain regulations. Having looked at the issues carefully, the need to be able to involve all stakeholders so that we come up with the right regulation, the need to understand the inputs from both the media and the government, the county governments, is very important, and the issue of also coming up with regulations which can be implemented. Sometimes we can be so reactive and put in excessive penalties when these particular instruments are used. So I think the fact that the committee came up with the idea that a better or more better regulations may be needed, and therefore the proposed regulations to be annulled in the entirety was actually correct, because proper consultation, the scope, the use of this particular equipment,
are very vital, so that tomorrow, when they are in place, we don't infringe we don't infringe on security, we don't infringe on privacy, and that also these particular instruments are used by people who are licensed properly and people who know the extent to which these particular instruments need to be used safely. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I rise to support. Thank you.
Very well. The member for Kathiani, the Honorable Mboi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity.
The Honorable Amunyenye, I see you shaking your head. I know you are a sinner, but just hold your horses a little bit. You will have an opportunity. The Honorable Mboi, proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker, for this opportunity. I want again to congratulate this committee, this very hard-working committee, for a job well done. It's a committee that is actually proving to be a no-nonsense committee. And we've seen regulations that have come here, and all of them are being annulled in their entirety. I want to just mention to members that do not brand this committee the annulling committee. The reason why they have to annul is because the only options given to the media uses drones to be able to pick report toys for children. So they're not necessarily bad. But the problem we have is in the regulations. Though parts of those regulations are also good. Because, for example, the registration of the drones, so that the civil aviation is aware of who has a drone, where it is operating from. I think that is part of the regulations, and that is a good thing. Also, of course, as they register, there's also the payment, so they'll be able to collect revenue for the country. That is also a good thing. And then they've also come up with regulations to guide the operations of the drones. And I think the proposal is to have pilots actually manning the drones, even remotely. And I think that's also a good thing. But, Speaker, we are tied to the regulations that are contained in the Statutory Instruments Act. And the challenges I talked about previously, one of which is legislation through the back door, can be seen within these regulations. Speaker, there is a regulation, the regulation-making authorities must confine themselves to the parent act. And this is the Civil Aviation Act of 2013, which in the penalties have set a limit of 2 million or 3 years in prison. Now, the regulations go and impose a penalty of 5 million. That is ridiculous. That is unacceptable. That is not possible. Because that means then, therefore, that this House can deliberate and make laws, and when the laws go to the regulation-making authorities, they amend them and they give other new laws. So there are limitations to what a regulation can do. It must confine itself to what is given in the parent act. And as a result of that, of course, as a committee, there was no way we could have accepted this. There is also another mandatory requirement under the Statutory Instruments Act, which is public participation. Speaker, they have come up with licensing fees, this much for running a drone in the country, but there has been no public participation. No one was called to be asked, nobody, even the key players that would be expected to participate in managing of drones, they were never consulted, they were not called. This thing was done hurriedly because there is a lot of applications, there is money that they need to get. So I think, Mr. Speaker, it is important that they realize that the law must be followed to the letter. And this committee, which is a no-nonsense committee, will continue scrutinizing every regulation. And every time they go against the Statutory Instruments Act, we will just annul in entirety, because we cannot amend and we cannot assist them to do their work. But we also ask the regulation-making authorities to consult, because it is allowed in the Act, that they consult with this committee so that they ensure that by the time they do print and gazette the regulations, there is no conflict, and that they would safely pass through. Speaker, there is also the issue of safety. You see, this country has been hit by terrorists in the past. And if you look at these drones, they can easily be used by terrorists, either to carry, those war chemicals or even bombs. And so we must ensure that when we look at the regulations, we don't see clear direction on the operations of these drones. So we feel that we may be allowing them, and then we jeopardize the security of this country. Not to forget, like my friends have said, fundamental freedoms like privacy. How do you have a drone hovering your compound when you're having a cup of tea or a bottle of whiskey outside there. You know, Mr. Speaker, we need privacy. Everyone needs privacy. Everyone needs to have their space. And so it is unfortunate. You can imagine a situation where you're in your compound and somebody somewhere is watching you, what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're behaving, how you're walking. So, Speaker, I think it is important that we protect the fundamental rights which are enshrined in the Bill of Rights in our Constitution by ensuring that even if these regulations will ever come back to be passed, they must fit within the confines of the law, and there must be things that are unacceptable. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I want to finish by saying that it is unfortunate, though these regulations have good things, that we have no option, we have no other option but to annul in their entirety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well spoken, the Honorable Boy. I think you've covered the matter quite well, and you have also baptized this committee as the no-nonsense committee. Very well. That's on a light note. The Honorable Zambe, you've just come in. The Honorable Munene Wambugu has been sitting here. Even the one behind you, the Honorable Mutemi, has also been here. So you will have to wait a little bit. Oh, you had gone for a short call. Very well. Very well. But you'll have an opportunity. The Honorable Munene?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to add my voice to this motion, and also at least appreciating I've really been around waiting, and give me an opportunity to talk before my colleague. I also want to confirm that I'm also a member, in fact a proud member of this committee, which is doing a very good job. And I think we will continue doing a very good job till we bring sanity in the regulation-making bodies. They need to get it very clearly, because I think they have been escaping with so many bad regulations, which when they are being enforced, they affect the people who elected us to come and represent them in this August House. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, it was very clear, and I remember when we visited the KCA, Kenya Civil Authority building, they are little admitted in their presentation that there was not enough public participation. These regulations were hardly made, and in the process, there were so many lacunas. And as the Honorable Boy has said, the lacunas are so many, we do not have an option as a committee but to annul these regulations. It also came out very clearly that much as drones are good, and it is a technology which time has come, we must embrace it, but there are also serious issues. And I remember the MD confessing that one of the countries which produce drones en masse, Israel, does not allow drones to be used within their soil. Because much as we have good use for the drones, we can also have very bad use for the drones. We know it's a matter of public domain, drones have been used to kill people, Al-Shabaab. That's why we need to tighten these regulations, make sure that the security of this country is not compromised by having bad regulations, which, if we allow them, they can easily be manipulated, and we find wrong drones in the wrong hands. There's also an issue which came out very clearly about privacy, that drones are very intrusive. They can intrude on your privacy in your house, wherever you are, without being checked. Mr. Speaker, that's why committee thought the issues to do with security, need to be tightened up so that at least Kenya rights can be safeguarded. Of more importance also is that there was a regulation which purported to enhance the fine from 2 million to 5 million. Yet, the Parent Act is very clear that the maximum fine is 2 million. And then a regulation comes through the back door and tried to introduce the fine as 5 million, which is actually against the Parent Act and also the Statutory Instrument Act. As I conclude, there was also a serious feeling by the members that the license fee which was put is actually excessive. And I remember someone there, I will not name names, considered, that is when we went for that meeting, that they also thought so, but they were told to put this figure and see the reaction. And someone get a feeling that, was it done deliberately so that maybe small traders, small people, cannot be able to get license for these drones? Was that the intention? So I think the figure was about 200,000. We all know there are some drones, toy drones, small drones. Why would you charge a Kenyan that kind of money? Yet, there was no adequate public participation. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support and urge the honorable members who are yet to contribute to really support this motion and annul these regulations. Thank you.
The Honorable Amunyenye.
Thank
The
you.
Honorable, the Honorable Zambe, you are in a hurry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I have not reached you, the Honorable Zambe.
I'm really not in a hurry, Mr. Speaker, but thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak. Mr. Speaker, I join my colleagues in strongly congratulating this committee. Mr. Speaker, the committee has come up with recommendations which we all support, that these regulations ought to be annulled, they should be rejected, and better regulations developed for use in the civil aviation. Mr. Speaker, in normal circumstances, regulations are expected to give clarity, to remove ambiguity where any exists, to ensure that there is order in the operations of any industry, Mr. Speaker. So regulations are such an important instrument which must be given good thought at all times. But it is important also to note, Mr. Speaker, that any regulations that are made must be consistent with the law in force. Regulations, Mr. Speaker, must be consistent with the law in force, both the Enabling Act or in such instruments and the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. As clearly pointed out by members of the committee, particularly the mover, you will notice that there are contraventions to the Enabling Act, there are contraventions to the Constitution, which should not be allowed to go through, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, the committee did a good job to point out all these contradictions and contraventions of the existing law, and we need to support the committee, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is the component of security, which has been pointed out, and safety of the people of Kenya. The drones are used by military, Mr. Speaker, and they are quite sophisticated, of course, with the technology that we're all moving towards. They fly very high, and they even take clear pictures, even if it's at night. They have, night vision power that they can get you wherever you are from very far in the sky, Mr. Speaker. So these are very powerful instruments which, if are to be used, we must have good regulations when they can be used and for what purpose. And, monitoring mechanism, how do you monitor them, Mr. Speaker? Because these drones are flown, and operated by someone at his own time, at his place, and unless you know that it's going to take place, they will move at your house, Mr. Speaker, and take pictures of what you'd be doing in the bedroom and even in some other place. And of course, this privacy is necessary for all of us, Mr. Speaker. But also, Mr. Speaker, the regulations we talk about, I'm not sure why these regulations which have not been done properly are pushed. There are regulations that we have been calling for over the years, Mr. Speaker, for the sugarcane subsector. We have said that there's a lot of, and which has been seen, there's so much disorder in the sugar subsector. Where there is poaching, where there is theft, where there are people fighting and importing sugar and causing problems for the farmers, regulations are not there. Then you bring wrong regulations for another industry, which, there's no reason to be given priority, Mr. Speaker. I want to appeal to those concerned to come up with regulations for the sugar subsector to ensure that people are not fighting for cane. As things stand now, many factories, even if they are opened, there is no sugar cane. Because people have been fighting left and right and going everywhere to steal what is not theirs. A company invests in development of a farm, then another one comes to harvest. This has caused problem in the country, Mr. Speaker, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, I am commending this committee, for them to come up with a recommendation that we annul these regulations because they are inconsistent. This is very important, and I would like the ministry concerned, Mr. Speaker, to come up with the regulations for sugarcane, subsector, in our country, so that you guide the operations, you put order in the industry for the benefit of our people. We all have condemned those who brought in sugar, Mr. Speaker, that is poisonous, that is killing our people. I'm told we have to follow up some cases where people have died as a result of consuming the sugar. Now that there's the evidence, those concerned, in fact, should be charged for murder, Mr. Speaker. What do you think, Mr. Speaker? They should be charged for murder, Mr. Speaker. Because
the Honorable Munyenyi, you want the Speaker's opinion? you know the law, Mr. Munyenyi. But very well, we have had you.
Mr. Speaker, I have had the privilege of serving in the African Union, as head of the mission in Mogadishu. And some of the experiences we had was the use of drones, and they were just then introduced. They had not even been used in Kenya, save for a few with the military. And Mr. Speaker, there is a lot that the drones can do if not properly controlled, monitored, and regulated. So I would like, Mr. Speaker, to conclude by saying that while we are opposed to the current set of regulations and are, of course, obviously going to annul them, it is necessary because in the era we're moving towards is that of technology and the use of things like drones. So it is important that the civil aviation sit down again, follow the procedures, develop regulations which are acceptable, which will be consistent with the law, enabling act, and the Constitution, and should be put in use to regulate and control the usage of drones. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support the committee recommendations. Thank you.
Everyone, we shall have the Honorable Mutemi. The Honorable Mutemi, I think you have spoken to among yourselves. You know what we need to do. We are running short of time, but I would like all of you to have some voice on this. Proceed, the Honorable Mutemi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually call myself Mulyungi. I didn't know it was me. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the report by the Committee on Delegated Legislation on annulment of drones regulations 2017. And I also join my colleagues in congratulating this committee on a job well done. I've heard that this is the only committee which is always full house and has completed all the matters on its table. Mr. Speaker, drones cannot be allowed to fly unmanned because they can be used for the wrong reasons, like my colleagues have said, especially breach of privacy, theft, and even terrorism attacks. Mr. Speaker, recently we witnessed an aircraft that crashed at the Badeas and many others which have happened in the past, and it still remains a mystery on how this has happened. In my view, therefore, Mr. Speaker, drones will not only escalate crime, but more air accidents if allowed to operate. Drones will therefore be dangerous death traps if not properly regulated and controlled. In this era of traffic jams, if drones are allowed without proper regulations, each one of us will leave their cars at home and fly drones to work and even to political rallies. Mr. Speaker, I therefore support the committee's regulations to only use drones for security operations and therefore support this motion to annul the regulations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Now the Honorable Zambia. The Honorable Mulungi, but Mutemi is also your name, isn't it? Yes. All right, but you prefer the Honorable Mulungi. Very well. I will take note of that next time. The Honorable Zambia?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let me take this opportunity first to say a big congratulations to this committee, which seems to be very much dedicated in discharging its duties. I'll just be very straight to the point that drones is not that they are bad, they are good, but now there must be a way of regulating their use. When it comes to security, it's very important and very paramount to take security measures for our people. We cannot allow just drones to be moved anywhere without any regulation. And even we call for the registration of the same, so that we can actually be specific for the purpose of the drones. Let me say, through the committee, we give them full support. They keep on scrutinizing the issue so that we get the best out of their works. Lastly, we need the KCA, Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, to have done public participation, enough consultation for the same, so that we have the best for our people and the country at large. Thank you very much. I support the motion, and I encourage the committee to keep on its spirit of doing the best. Thank you.
Honorable Kimilo. Joshua, the member for Kaiti.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. I want to take this chance to join my colleagues by congratulating the committee for a good job they are doing. And I say that this country, we need good regulations and the laws of doing things. Let me say that drones are good. I remember some times back I went to China and I bought very good drones for my children, for the entertainment of my children, but I was not allowed to pass in the airport with the drones due to lack of proper regulations to this country. So I take this chance to support the committee and say that this country, we need regulations of the support, positive support, because even these drones, for security purpose, we can't even forget to say that for regulation purpose, it's very important because I remember sometimes back in my village, there was a function which was going on and the media people were using the drones. And actually, it drew attention for the function. Actually, it couldn't even go on because there's no even awareness of the drones. And we need to educate also. We need to do public participation also. People have to be given a chance to know more about the drones. And as we also allow the drones, actually people need to have the know-how about the drones. So I take this chance to support the motion and congratulate the committee. Thank you very much.
There being no other member interested in speaking to this, I'll therefore now call upon the mover to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to reply. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all members who have contributed on this important issue, and also thank the members of the Committee of Delegated Legislation. I beg to reply.
Very well, members, for obvious reasons, I'll not proceed to do the next action that is necessary here. We'll defer to the next time the House, the matter is set down. And honorable members, the time being 7 p.m., this House stands adjourned till Tuesday, the 26th June, 2018, 2:30 p.m. at 2:30 p.m.